What's up, guys? Welcome back to LS Live. Today's show is going to be on the evolution of masculinity, and I just picked that name out of like a box.
It's a great
idea.
It's a great topic. I think it's something, especially considering what we do for a living, is a topic that we have a lot to talk about. So, and I think it was something that when we did the poll, a lot of guys brought that up. A lot of guys mentioned masculinity as something they wanted to actually for us to discuss. Us being the beacons of masculinity on the internet. And surely the beacons of masculinity on YouTube live stream right now, I'm assuming. I don't know.
The most masculine show on YouTube Live.
That's right.
Yeah, it was the second most popular issue that guys brought up. And like, I think it's super duper important because I think that there's like masculinity. There's a lot of people who say that masculinity is in crisis or something like that. A lot of people who are like down on masculinity. And a lot of guys who are like, screw you for being down on masculinity. And I think it's really important to have like intelligent conversations about this stuff because nobody's having intelligent conversations about this. I don't think. I think there's a lot of politics involved in like every single conversation that people have about that. And one thing that's cool about you and me is that we don't give a shit what anybody else thinks, and we always say our mind all the time. And I think that's why, if anybody tunes into the show, that's probably what they like about us.
That's like one of the problems too, I think. I don't know if you just want to jump into this, because I got a lot of things I could talk about. But
yeah, let's go.
I think one of the things that you always see, like in popular culture, is that if you tell someone, like, okay, what are some things the way you would describe like a strong female, like a strong female sort of character, they have all these things that they would say, right? Like, oh, she's brash, and she like doesn't take shit from people, and she, she says what she means. She goes against the grain. But if you ask someone like, oh, what is a strong masculine character? It's not really as positive necessarily. I guess depending on who you ask. But you said someone like a guy that really shows masculine attributes, they'd probably just be like, oh, he's probably like really muscly, and he's probably like aggressive, and he's probably like someone who's kind of rude and brash. And it almost kind of takes a negative connotation when you talk about it in that way, which is too bad, because there's a lot of great positive masculine qualities that I think the popular culture doesn't really put a spotlight on.
Yeah.
They have a little bit recently when you see these shows like Mad Men and like Deadwood, which is, I guess, kind of long gone now, but there was a resurgence for a little bit of these masculine sort of stereotypes that I think people could look at and point and say, yes, that's masculine and that is positive. But the problem was, even with Mad Men, is that it quickly turned into debauchery very quickly, right?
Well, even Mad Men, those characters are very flawed.
Yeah,
which is
fine.
Well, yeah, they're not. It's not interesting unless the characters are flawed.
Of course,
but they're not good role models necessarily.
Yeah. But but even in those shows, their masculinity and those traits ended up being their downfall, right? Like that's sort of what led them down that path of negativity, whether it was cheating or being alcoholic or being violent or whatever. It just seems to be with those characters, that's the way you see it. It's like, oh wow, you respect it and it's great, but there's always they got to pay the piper at some point for having those positive traits in today's society, at least seen through that lens, which is too bad.
So I want to ask the question, do you think that that's actually true? Like that's a trait of masculinity that it has its inherent downsides? Or whether that's just the way that people feel the need to write television shows these days? But I'm not going to ask that question right now because I want to start at the beginning.
Let that percolate.
And so I want to talk about let's talk about what masculinity is.
Right.
Then I want to talk about the evolution of masculinity because I added the evolution of masculinity because I want to talk about evolution. I want to talk about like biology a little bit in when we're talking about masculinity because I think it's illuminating and it separates out what is like, let's say, inherent from masculinity versus what might be versus what you just learned from TV.
Are you thinking like biological, like from like an evolutionary point of view? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then, so what is masculinity? What is the evolution of masculinity scientifically? And then let's talk about it culturally. Has it grown?
Right.
And then, so I think that third one is where we'll
get
back to that question.
Yeah, how it affects us today.
Let's tease these guys with the rich cultural stuff. Everybody wants us to talk about that stuff, but we're going to talk about some science first.
Let's talk about some science.
So what is masculinity to you? What do you think masculinity is about?
Well, I mean, that's hard. That's a hard thing to boil down to. soundbite. But I guess masculinity to me, in terms of being a masculine man, would be protecting, your loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
It would be sort of being honest and having integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be, you know what? I think that might be, if I'm going to really boil it down, would be the two big ones. Taking care of the people that you love and having integrity and living a life of I guess integrity. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's good.
Yeah.
I think that's good. Yeah, for me, I had, I had the privilege of learning from some interesting men as a child and growing up. So I had my father, who was he was an interesting guy. He was a thoughtful guy, but he was also pretty masculine. He was into sports, taught me hockey, camping, very much about like nature and stuff like that.
Typical Canadian
Typical
dad.
Canadian dad.
Yeah.
Then I had my grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, and who was a very typical British granddad, like pipe and books with Winston Churchill's face on them. He had a study.
Yeah.
He had a million Winston Churchill books.
Mm-hmm.
Winston Churchill wrote a whole lot of books.
Yeah.
And then there were a whole bunch more books written about Winston Churchill. And I think if you, as a child, I recall looking at the wall and it says Winston Churchill, Winston Churchill, Winston Churchill everywhere. But he was also like, he was a book publisher. I thought my grandfather was like a general.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out he was in the military for like 4 years, from 1939 to 1940 to 1945, so that'd be 5 years. And then he was a book publisher for the rest of his life, but I always saw him as a military kind of guy. So those guys gave me my perspective of masculinity, and I think that it doesn't, like, the idea that masculinity is like is aggressive or violent, or that it is in any way negative, I think is completely wrong. And I think it's completely I'm getting into the cultural stuff already. It's completely wrong, and it's a straw man set up by people who don't like masculinity,
mm-hmm.
Who want to tear it down. But for me, it was always somebody who's strong, is the strong silent type, is strong, but not somebody who backs down from what they believe in. But
it's sort of like a laconic kind of vibe for a man.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I can.
And so these folks were my role models, and my grandfather was he was in the war, so he did know violence, but didn't want to go back there. Like anyone who has been through that kind of conflict, it's not a glorious thing. Was my impression I got.
That actually, because you see it in stories and stuff too. Some of those guys, maybe even especially the British, that were like career soldiers. They're kind of like, oh, the good old days when we got to fly the planes over the Pacific and blah blah blah. And it's kind of like there is almost actually I'm going to talk about this later because this relates to this too. But there is sort of almost like a rite of passage they took by going to war, especially when they were a lot younger when they went to war, that they look back on almost fondly because they see it as how they became a man.
And I do think that rite of passage thing is actually really crucial for a man.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important part of masculinity. Let's
talk about that, because that's something I want to talk about. Yes. So in Western culture, we don't really have rites of passage. They have existed in other generations, but they've really only taken the form of having to go to war. Has sort of acted as a rite of passage for a lot of men in Western culture. But in other cultures, in primitive, I guess you could say, cultures, there's what they call rite of passage, which are essentially at some point, and this is like tribal cultures, and almost every single one in the world has a version of this. And we know this because there's still a lot of cultures that still exist that still do this. And they have essentially what it is it's a rite of passage. So at some point when a boy reaches the age where he becomes a man, usually when he's in the early teens, 13, 14, 15, he has to go through a ritual. Now the rituals can vary They can be things where they have to go out into the woods for a length of time and be alone and survive. Sometimes it's mutilation. Sometimes it's other things they have, like hazing almost. But there's always something where they have to go through where they have the transition where they go from being a boy to being a man. And this is really important, not just because of the cultural significance of it, but also from a tribal significance or even a personal significance, because it stops the boys thinking from the way that a boy would think. Mm-hmm. So they see their father and they see their elders and they see how they act, and they act like boys, and that's okay, but after they go through that rite of passage, they are now men. And there's a really big significance to that, because it means they have to stop acting like boys. So, yeah. and you do see it in these cultures where, they're 13 years old and they're still playing, they're still doing all these fun things, but then they become a man. There's a lot of pride surrounded, with this, and they get invited to go on the hunts. They have to do all the jobs and the work that the men have to do. They have a different attitude about life and about how they see their family and whatnot, and it's a complete change. And we don't have that in Western culture, which is why you see a lot of men, 20, 30, 40 years old that are still acting like man children.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask a question.
Yeah.
And I know the answer, but
right.
I don't think you got
for
the
the purpose of discussion.
Why do you have to go through a rite of passage to become a man?
I think there needs to be an event that hits you in a certain way, that has an emotional significance to you, that you can see as in your timeline a benchmark or a place marker of when you stop being a boy, and that you can identify with the end of boyhood. And sometimes that takes, and this is the reason why I think a lot of these rites of passage involve great amounts of fear and self-preservation, and because I think that's part of it, being a man, which is why also, going to war, I think, acted in a lot of ways as a rite of passage for a lot of these, Western guys, because, and I think there's a camaraderie aspect to it too, knowing that by doing this, you're doing the same thing that all the other elders or the other men in your tribe have done, so there's a camaraderie there. And it's almost like a welcoming, like a brotherhood. So once you pass it, you get welcomed into manhood. And I think that's what the military does. I would be very surprised if they didn't study that and use it effectively in the way that they, conscript soldiers.
Here's what I think.
Right.
Is I think you touch on it a little bit, but you miss out like the central part to it.
All right.
Is that when you're a child, you live in a world that is created by other people. You live in society.
Yeah.
You get your food by asking for it from the people around you, and they provide you. And maybe you do something to trade for your food or something like that. Mm-hmm. But you're not dealing directly with the real world.
Right.
You're dealing with the real world via the adults in your society who are protecting you, who are insulating you from the actual real world that's out there beyond your village. And so I think that the real transition from boyhood to manhood happens when you stop being a part of this family, being sheltered from the real world, and you have to go out and you have to experience the real world like in an unfiltered kind of way. Mm-hmm. And you realize what the real world is all about, and that changes your perspective entirely. And so when you go to war, it's kind of like that, because people, I mean, you're still in the military, but there's people out there who are trying to kill you, and this is all real life things, and there's nothing you can do or people you can appeal to protect you from that danger. You have to protect yourself. You have to protect the people around you. But also things like so for me, I think my rite of passage that I did, and I was following my father's example, but I went backpacking in Asia all by myself when I was 18 years old, and it's absolutely the best thing that I have ever done, even though it was very scary for me at the time. But like, I arrived in Bangkok as like this 19-year-old with a little bit of money in his pocket, and I didn't know how to get on the freaking bus. I didn't know how to get out of Bangkok, and it actually took me like 4 days to wake up in time to make it to the bus stop in time for the bus out of town, because my parents had always done that for me. And that's a very trivial kind of thing, but then I went through this experience of, people trying to rob me and people trying to
They speak English?
putting myself in dangerous situations.
They speak English?
Yeah, plenty of people speak English.
So it wasn't just a language barrier, literally. It was mostly just you having to figure shit out, even though they could understand you.
Dude, I just couldn't get my act together to get to the bus stop was like across town, and this is Bangkok, which is like the world's biggest city, and all the maps are in Thai and stuff like that. So I had to ask people to tell me where the bus stop was on the map, and then where am I right now, and like do stuff like that. This is 2000. I didn't have GPS or anything at the time, but it was the fact that like I had to deal with all these problems 100% by myself. Couldn't rely upon anyone else because you have no idea. You have no idea how much you rely upon other people and how much you are and the more you rely upon other people, the more you if you rely on other people and you're not aware of it, you are still a child. Is my thought. And if you rely upon other people and you're aware of it, you're grateful. You need other people to flourish in life, but you've got to know how much other people are pulling up the slack on your life, and if you're not aware of this, it's hard to contribute to society.
What do you think about this? This kind of goes along with your point. You ever notice that like maybe guys that grew up in the let's say 70s and 80s, guys maybe they were too young for Vietnam and maybe even too old for the Gulf War, whatever, but they grew up in this environment in let's say the 70s and 80s, and I'm kind of strictly speaking about Western culture here in the U.S. and Canada and stuff. 70s and 80s being a time when you weren't too coddled in terms of culturally, right? So, and especially if you're in the big metro areas in the cities and stuff, a lot of violence, a lot of crime going on, especially in the big cities, New York and Chicago and Toronto and all these places. And you meet people like that grew up in those times. They just seem a little bit more masculine if they had to grow up in a different time. Even myself, I see, me growing up in the 80s and you as well, I see a big difference between myself and let's say other kids that are 10 years younger than me, growing up in a very different environment, even though it's only 10 years difference, very different environment. And I wonder if that's a part of it too, because you said like, you're not as, you don't have to rely on other people. And I think there's an element of coddling, I guess would be the best word, that happens in today's culture where people are afraid to offend other people, they're afraid to say anything or do anything that might hurt someone's feelings. And because of that, I think culturally, we start looking at that as being something that, that can't happen. Where I think when that was happening, and we had to just deal with it, that was making us, I guess in one way, more masculine, in the sense that we would not be able to get so bothered by something so trivial.
Yeah.
And it seems stupid to even talk about it in those terms. Being a man is not being,
Men need stoicism a little bit more because if only for the fact that, again, as a man you are going to be called upon to deal with the difficulties of life head on, and women often can get men to do that kind of stuff, to be honest.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, okay, so a stoic, if you're practicing stoicism and being like a stoic, why don't you explain a little what that is?
I mean, stoicism is the philosophy that what the things that disturb you in life are more the result of your attitudes about them than they are of the thing themselves. The stoicism is the idea that whatever you go through, whatever sort of suffering or pain you go through, makes you stronger. It can make you stronger, and it's only your bad attitude, your wrongful attitude towards the slings and arrows of everyday life, that it's only those bad attitudes that actually cause real suffering. And and so that suffering is actually not something to be necessarily avoided, because you can't, you're always gonna, because suffering comes from inside, comes from your own attitude, you can't avoid it. And it's a very liberating philosophy. So for me, when I was, in Asia, I slept on, I remember I slept on, I slept on like a tiny little, just like a little piece of wood about this thing, and I had to cross my arms like this, and I slept all night, and I was fine. The thing that I realized was I lived in, relative poverty. I lived better than most people in Thailand, but much worse than I did in the West. I lived in relative poverty. I had a lot of uncomfortable experiences, and it was awesome. It was not bad at all. I was scared of going there, that I was gonna have an awful time with it, but I wasn't comfortable while I was there in the moment. But when I got out, I felt so good and so liberated afterwards. And so then you realize that the stuff you worry about, the stuff that most people worry about in their lives, the stuff that people freak out over, like being offended, or like somebody saying something poor about you, or having a bad attitude towards you, or criticism from other people. That stuff does not affect your happiness unless you let it. And so your happiness is entirely under your control.
Yeah, and I think that's something that, when it comes to Stoicism, is like one of the big things I took away from that. And I remember reading about it and being like, oh my God, yes, this is exactly it. Why doesn't everyone just do this? It's so simple. Perception is reality. Just don't let things bother you, and then they don't bother you. Exactly. It's entirely in your mind. I just read some of the comments. Some of the guys want to know about other examples of rites of passage that I guess in a Western culture you can do. And I actually did want to get into this because it's something that I got to do, which is really worthwhile. If you do any sort of... when I got older, I did a rite of passage when I was younger, but it was not a real rite of passage. It was mostly just done for just kind of like a fun thing. You get to go out in the woods with the tribal elder and stuff. But I did do a more like a real one when I was older, in my early 20s, which was a survival training. And I took a bunch of survival training. There was a series that I watched, actually, before I got into it, which was Ray Mears, who is this British survival bushcraft expert. And he's kind of like Bear Grylls or Survivor Man if you're in Canada, except he's less dramatic and less flashy for TV, and he's more just sort of bare bones, getting down to the real magic of bushcraft and stuff. And anyway, so I watched all his series, and I got really into it, and I thought, you know what, the best thing that I could do right now in my life, even though I didn't have much money or anything going on, would be to take this stuff, because a lot of my fears at the time came from me being scared of what would happen if I ran out of money, or I couldn't get a job,
yes,
and I rented them and I couldn't afford rent, and what would I do? And that was a big source of fear for me. So for me, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go take this survival training, and at least then I know that if shit went really bad, I'm not gonna live on the street. I'll just go to the woods, and I'll know how to survive, and I'll probably be happier. And that was my sort of thought behind it. So I did it. And you ended up going out in the woods for 2 weeks, and you got to make your own shelter, and you got to find water, and you got to find food, and you got to build a campsite and all this sort of stuff. But it was great because you learn all these things that, although I watched a lot of videos about them, having to do them myself was very different.
Oh yeah.
And it was great because now I know that if that did ever happen, I'd be okay. And there's a certain level of confidence I think that you get as a man because it's such a primal thing. When you look at our evolutionary history, that's the one skill set that that all men had. They would have needed, not just have it, needed in order to survive. And so I think there's a strong connection you get to your masculinity when you have that skill set sort of down pat. You think, you know what, world goes to shit, World War III, or on the other end of the spectrum, I just go camping with some buddies, I'm okay. I can rough it and fully rely on my own my own knowledge. And I think that's something, if you want to do that, I totally recommend it. I do recommend going all in. Don't just go for like, I'm going to go camping.
So you did 2 weeks of this?
Yeah, so we went 2 weeks, and this was in New Brunswick, where I'm from. Build a camp. It was great. 2 weeks in the woods.
So, I had a similar experience because I do think that you're right. That idea of being able to like start things over again, like just as an option, is very liberating. Like because you get super attached to certain things. There's a lot of people who are like, you're terrified of losing your job, you're terrified of losing your apartment or something like that. And a lot of the time, when you lose these things, you realize it's not actually that bad. Like you lose, like somebody's terrified of losing their job for years. They lose their job. They find a better job and they're happier like within 3 months. And like the fear that they had of losing their job was actually more harmful to their self-esteem over those years than the loss of the job itself. And I think you can get there by hitting rock bottom inadvertently, or you can control that situation and when you're able to take a break from society and from your life, go start over again, even if it's just like taking a month off and going to a new town and trying to build a social circle and a life there. But you're able to do that, and all of a sudden you realize that like even if you lose you lose that attachment to some of the things in your life that are unhealthy attachments, like a particular job or a particular lifestyle that maybe you don't even like that much.
Yeah, there was a great comment by one of my instructors at the time, which kind of connects with what you just said, where he said most people live lives where they have these nets that they've created for themselves, these safety nets, right? And sometimes it's your job, but most people live a life where if that one net breaks, they come crashing down. They don't have any safety nets, right? Which is a pretty common expression. But so this was the way the instructor put it was when you can learn survival skills on how to survive in the wild, it's like putting a big pillow on the rock bottom. So you know that if you ever get all your nets fail, you're still going to land on a nice soft cushion, and it may not be a luxurious cushion, but you're not going to die. You're going to be okay. And that's sort of the idea. And just having that, even visualizing that at the time, I remember thinking, oh my God, man, so much stress just lifted off of me. Because you know that even if everything goes to shit, you're still going to be fine. You can still survive and at least have your bare needs covered. And I think that's a very, very liberating feeling if you can do that. So I do recommend that.
All right, let's talk about evolution. I want to talk about the evolution of masculinity because I like talking about evolutionary psychology and all this kind of stuff. But one thing I talk about in a lot of my classes is like the nature of attraction and what women are attracted to in men. Because what women are attracted to in men and masculinity are basically the same thing. This is because of an evolutionary process called sexual selection, where women and females in a species select peacocks for having these big tails because they show fitness. And what are they attracted to? What are the unique traits of the peacock? There's the tail. What are the female peacocks, peahens attracted to? It's the tail. It's the same thing. The reason why men and women are different is because women prefer different things in their partners than men prefer in their partners. So so women are attracted to masculinity intrinsically, I think, and so then it comes down to what are the traits of what do women find attractive? What is masculinity? And you look at the research and you realize that there's three main things that that women are attracted to, and that is I summarize it as the feeling of being desired by a powerful man. Those are the three things that's the one thing that creates attraction in a woman, and it's comprised of three things, which is that power. The power that comes from being a guy being a confident man. It's desire. So desiring women is an intrinsic part of heterosexual masculinity at the very least, but it's something that every heterosexual man has, and you should not be ashamed of it or pretend like that's not a part of you as much as your beard is. And then it's the feeling of being desired by a powerful man she can trust. And that trust and integrity is something that women find extremely desirous and they really want in a partner. And it's something that I think real men also need to have. On top of this being power, this ability to interact in the real world and get things done and put your mark on the world, which I think is something that every man kind of like has this desire to do, and you should let it out. But to have that integrity as well is equally important. And also, more than the other ones, that element of integrity is the big thing that nobody ever talks about as a masculine trait.
Yeah, I agree. I think that especially when it comes to, and just to be clear, when you said a powerful man, you kind of went into it a little bit, but obviously we don't mean physical power. There's a lot of ways you can be powerful to a woman, and sometimes it is physical.
I talk about inner power.
Inner power, yeah. So
not everybody can get jacked.
No, of course.
In a short period of time, or however you measure power. Is an external thing.
A man that has control over his world, I guess would be one way to put it. But
I define it as power in engineering is the ability to perform work over time.
Right.
It's the ability to, and so I would define internal power as being the ability to turn your thoughts into reality, the ability to make just an impact on the world, however it is. That's the kind of thing, that's in the end is whether it's like kicking a soccer ball into the net or building an airplane,
There's this guy I know. I don't want to say his name, but there's this guy I know really good looking dude, really confident, really good with girls, can never get a serious relationship, at least for very long, and it's because girls would inevitably at some point always realize that the guy was never going to be more than what they already saw in him, right?
Mm-hmm.
He had no drive to make things, to change his lot in life, and there's a lot of women out there that are fine with that, but for him anyway, when he was looking for these really top shelf women, that was something they always wanted in a guy, and he just didn't have it.
Yeah.
And I talked about it at times, but it was just something he just was like, yeah. But it's a massive thing. That ability to take your dreams and aspirations and turn them into, take action on them and turn them into your reality is a massive attraction switch for women. So, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because that is a huge one. Yeah. What else? Right. Evolution. What else do you want to hit on? This is a good subject.
Yeah. So let's talk about the integrity.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what does integrity mean. And I don't want to imply that women don't have integrity or anything like that, but I do think it is something that is it's necessary for men, and you're gonna have, that's about it. It's something that men need, women need it as well. But we'll talk about it in a masculine context.
Right. So what is integrity?
So if power is the ability to turn your thoughts into reality, I think integrity to a large degree is the idea that your words represent your reality. Your words represent your actions. Yeah. Your thoughts and your actions are aligned with one another.
Yeah.
And if you're somebody who says what you think and you do what you say and you think what you do and all those things work together, then people will perceive you as a person of integrity.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of things. So having a lack of integrity isn't just lying, right? Most people say lack of integrity is somebody who says A and does B. Mm-hmm. But it can also be somebody who says A and just doesn't do A.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody who has values and beliefs but just doesn't act on them. Or believes something and holds it back and suppresses it and doesn't say things. And when you're with a woman, when you're, let's say, chatting with a woman you just met, how does your integrity play into it? What will women do to test your integrity?
They're going to see if you actually have if you'll take action for the beliefs that you have. Yeah.
Absolutely. They absolutely, probably subconscious, but they absolutely
I think that's one way that they actually, maybe it's an evolutionary thing too, because I think it's, people always talk about, women make men better, and I think that's one way in which they do that.
Mm-hmm.
They have these guys that say like, I would do this, I would do that, and women are kind of like, oh yeah? Let's throw some shade at that and see what happens. And if guys can't stand up, they know, nope, that's not someone who has integrity. And it's funny because a lot of guys I think would think they have integrity until a really gorgeous girl comes along, and that guy may say like, oh, I believe A, and then a gorgeous girl comes along and says, I think A's dumb. And the guy's like, yeah, I think A's dumb.
I didn't like that very much.
Yeah.
In the first and I liked a little bit.
Integrity goes completely away. And they don't realize that when they do that, she might have that belief, but she could be, not that they're manipulative, but she could be just doing that to see how you stand up for your own beliefs. If she knew, presumably that you already had that belief, she may challenge it just to see if you're someone who's actually going to stand up for what he believes in. And as soon as you don't, she has no more respect for you.
All right. If we want to go back to evolution,
yeah.
We're talking about sexual selection, and he's talked about the peacock has this big bright tail,
yes.
in part because it shows that he's fit, so that the female peacocks will the male with the biggest with the best tail is the best mate. So peacocks evolved these big tails to show off to women, basically. But what they found is that peahens evolved sharper eyesight, so that they could actually evaluate the tails of the male peacocks.
Mm.
And so what if we apply that to human beings, we might come to the conclusion that as men, if having an inner power and having integrity is something that women find attractive in a man, that women actually have perhaps evolved a not only a preference for this, but a very discerning ability to identify a man of integrity from a man who lacks integrity, and in a way that perhaps your average guy doesn't notice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
I would say that's true. Yeah,
I might be backwards rationalizing my experiences with women and applying evolutionary theory to it, but that's actually what I believe.
Here's what I believe. I don't know if you believe this, but this is something I do believe in.
Is this about aliens?
No.
Right.
It is controversial though. I believe a lot of behaviors that men and women exhibit, even today, directly relate to evolutionary things that happen over the course of what we really existed in most of our existence, which is just like 50-person tribes, right? 99.9% of our existence as humans is in the 50-person tribes. It's only recently that we've been in modern culture. Anyway, so things like, what happens in a 50-person tribe? Well, we know because 50-person tribes still exist. And we know that in almost all of them, there are roles that get attributed to men and roles that get attributed to women. And not to sound too sexist, because this is just a reality, but in a lot of these cultures, the men go out and do the hunting, and they do
all of the cultures.
All the cultures.
All.
They go out and do the hunting. They bring back the food, and the women stay behind, and they maybe pick tubers and get some things for the food. But they also rear the children, and they're also much more involved in the sort of the social aspects of the tribe and the social hierarchy of the tribe. And so, what even now today are men good at versus what women are good at? Well, as men, what do? We value things. So we like having the nicest car. We like having the nicest gadgets. We really put a lot of value in our possessions. Much like in a 50-person tribe, the person that has the sharpest spear and the best sort of maybe leather armor or something is not going to die as much and bring home more food. We also learned that when men socialize, when you hang out with your buds, what do? Men go and do things together, right? So we do activities together. Whereas women don't really do activities together. What they do is they actually get together and they talk. Right? And they might do an activity as a reason to go out, but really what it's about is them bonding. Whereas men, we go and do the activity and don't really talk too much, and that's how we bond, by doing the activity together. Well, the reason behind that, at least for what I believe, is that because when you're going out hunting with the other men in a tribe, you can't talk because you're going to scare away the game. So you actually bond with other men by looking at cues and doing things and doing the activity together. Whereas women would, a lot of their evolutionary value, I guess, in terms of how they would be able to succeed in generations, was being able to read other women, knowing what's going on in the tribe, knowing which man is sleeping with the other guy, who's going to get axed next, who has the power in that tribe. And that's why you find women are much more, especially when you get them in environments where they may not know each other, they get more catty, they're trying to figure out where the hierarchy is, and they're really good at it. And they're also really good at reading people's emotions. If someone's lying, they can tell. They may not be able to pinpoint it, but they'll just get a bad feeling. So there is a huge evolutionary incentive to being able to do that. Whereas guys, we don't pick up on it that much. And it's because we never really had to for our survival. As long as we can kill more things and bring home more meat and be smarter with the things that we can create to make that easier for our family and our tribe, that's how we provide value. And then also, as men, I suppose, being able to woo the women and create a lot of offspring. And those are the things you tend to see that men value even in today's culture. So anyway, it's interesting, I think, that even today we're a product of our evolution, even in today's society and culture. As much as I think some aspects of modern feminism would try to diminish or say that it's sexist to even have those beliefs, I don't think we can help it. I think it's hard-coded in our DNA for a lot of it.
Absolutely. No, I absolutely don't believe the what is called the blank slate hypothesis, which is that our entire everything we know, our personalities, are created by society.
Yeah.
And the fact is there's actually no scientific evidence for this. This is a political opinion that is pushed very hard in universities.
It was nature versus nurture, which would be a similar study, wouldn't it?
Yes, basically. And the thing being that, scientifically speaking, nature has a huge role, and nurture not so much.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who are really, really pushing the nurture thing. The fact is, it does not influence a great deal of our personalities. And the fact is, our brains evolved. We have intelligence because intelligence was useful to us on the African savannah or wherever we were evolving. And we're only really intelligent. We're just barely intelligent enough that we can surpass that. We're capable of reason, but we don't actually operate on reason most of the time as human beings, and that's the thing that we've got to be humble about ourselves. And realize that that's actually the case. Because if we see ourselves as being perfectly rational, we're going to become absolutely blind to all of the evolutionarily ingrained faults that we have as human beings.
Yeah, and I think, you're right, because then you become ignorant.
Guys, if you are watching this, all right, don't click away now, but there is a really, really awesome lecture that's by Jordan Peterson that I'm going to share with you guys later, but don't click away from this video.
So what do we got? We got some comments?
All right, so we're going to be sending out the link to the Google Hangouts, so if you would like to ask some questions of us live on air, you can appear on video or you can appear just with your voice. If you'd like to ask some questions, go and click that link. You're going to talk to Sarah, our assistant, and she's going to take your question and get you on air if you'd like to ask a question of me or Derek live.
Also, feel free to just jump in. If you're on the chat, you can ask questions on there. We see it with a bit of delay, so, but I mean, obviously, if you guys put a question in there, we will see it.
Absolutely. And
good
so,
discussion.
Yeah. So, okay, so we got some questions actually from the group here, so let's start with those ones.
Yeah, let's go back up.
And
We missed a few.
let me just, I think I gotta close this thing.
Oh, you put on the emoticon, hide chat. Or no, that wouldn't do it. Never mind. Hit the smiley face again, maybe? Can you scroll up?
Oh, no!
No, that just hides the chat. Whatever. Can you scroll up on it? Just put Just type a smiley face, and this will goes away. We're gonna put a smiley face in chat.
It won't go away. Was that? Oh, there we go. The black smiley face is how to remove the smiley face menu. All right. So, okay, we got a question. We got, what kinds of activities can serve as de facto rites of passage, meaning even though your society lacks a rite of passage? What stand-in rite of passage can be used instead? So I think in the modern day, the best rite of passage, if you can afford it, is traveling. I think that traveling by yourself, even I traveled all by myself, which I actually only did because my high school friends bailed on me, and I didn't want to stick around my small hometown after I graduated. But traveling by yourself is fine. Traveling with one friend is fine too. But I think traveling by yourself. I don't know what else.
I mean, what I said earlier, survival training, I think is really good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, any sort of thing that gets you out of your element. I mean, if you don't want to travel alone, I agree with Chris. I think it is really good. I mean, there is sort of like lots of people have taken those, and I wouldn't really call it as a rite of passage, but like Kentucky tours and things like that, where you're forced to sort of go around and experience their culture.
I wouldn't do a guided. I did a guided tour at the beginning of my thing so that I didn't like die of food poisoning in my first day.
Yeah.
My parents made me do that. That was fine, but you got to leave the guided tour. It's not a rite of passage if it's guided.
No.
That's the whole point.
There needs to be an element of fear. I mean, if it's scary, that's why you should be doing it. That's the main thing.
I would also say that another thing that I did when I was in university is I went up north, and I went up north by myself, and I worked in Dawson City, Yukon, for a summer, and that was an awesome rite of passage type situation for me, because I just arrived in this town not knowing anybody. It was one of these towns that like you're going to get a job like nowadays would be like
work in the asbestos mine.
Yeah, basically it was just some town where you can get off the bus and get a job right away.
Physical labor.
And doing basically physical labor. Actually, it wasn't very physical labor. I was waiting. No, I was working at the. I was working at
the bar, right?
The bar, and I was.
Where you kiss the decomposed toe?
Yes.
Yeah.
But they had a. But anyway, just going to that new town, I just did it for summer. I made good money. I met people. It was also very difficult, but that was a good experience. And that was one, if you don't have money, going to it would probably be like South Dakota to some oil town and getting a job.
Montana or
banging iron for $30 an hour or something like that. It'd probably pay pretty good. That would be a good rite of passage for you. And I tell you what, no matter what you want to do in your life, whether you want to be a computer engineer or a politician or a doctor, you spend a summer like out in the the West or someplace banging iron or working on some some roughneck facility, you're going to learn a lot.
You're
going to learn a lot about being a man.
I always had this idea of masculinity that I don't know if it still exists nowadays, but I remember like when I was a kid, I don't know if you ever saw this on PBS. They used to show those. I used to watch like Wild America with Marty Stauffer and stuff when I was a kid, and then they had like the Dick Proenneke documentary, Alone in the Wilderness, where he went up to Alaska. This guy was a 50-year-old machinist from the Midwest who decided to drop everything and go up to Alaska and build his own cabin and essentially live in the wild for the rest of his life, which ended up being like 30-some years. And I always saw that as sort of like the most romantic, I guess romantic's the wrong word, but like just the high watermark of masculinity, you know, being able to go out and sort of carve your own path out of nature and like not only just nature, but like the harshest environments. And I think although that's incredibly difficult, and you know, Dick Proenneke, although he was only a machinist, grew up in a time where he just learned a lot of stuff that people just don't learn anymore. But that kind of goes along with my point, which is I think that we, as men nowadays, we lost a lot of that. You know, there was a certain element of know-how that I think we had in previous generations that we just don't have anymore. You know, my father was someone I could just, you know, my dad, I could ask him anything how to fix it, and he just knows how. To this day, he just knows how to do it. Whether it's fixing the boiler down in the basement, or fixing a car, or taking apart a lawnmower, or anything, he just knows how to do it. And you don't really get that nowadays. So I made a point, you know, since like 10 years ago, to start learning all that stuff. You know, in the past 5 years, I started taking apart engines and stuff and just trying to figure out how they work. But all that sort of stuff, survival training, working on engines, being able to sort of, you know, I guess having a certain knowledge of farming and edible sort of plants and things like that. All that sort of stuff, really, really great knowledge to have. So anything you can do revolves around that. I think it's great. But also, as Chris said, going into an environment where you know nobody. Not only don't know anybody, but the culture is almost an alien culture. Or at least the landscape is an alien landscape. So I guess if you're going to stay in the States, you don't get much money. Yeah, go to, you know, Montana or South Dakota or somewhere where physical labor is your only option, and you got to sort of deal with that. I think is a really great thing. I think any place you can go to really get outside your comfort zone is going to really.
Here's the thing. This is one thing I realize about a lot of people, like especially if you can go through your entire life as a man inside of a Skinner box. What a Skinner box is a Skinner box is one of these little cages that they put rats in, where the rat goes up to the lever and he presses a button and he gets his food pellets. And you know, there's rats that live for generations inside these Skinner boxes, and they perform experiments on them, and they get these rats to, you know, train them to do all kinds of things, run through mazes and stuff like that. And for those rats who have never lived outside of the Skinner box, they think that's their life. They think that's the universe. All right, is running through a maze or performing whatever task that the experimenter has set for them. All right, and to be a real man. And the reason why you have to go out and you have to leave your society and you have to you know, deal with reality as it is because you have to get out of that Skinner box. If you go through university, you know, you go through from your family through high school to university. University is a Skinner box, man. You go into university, you say what the professors want you to say, and they give you the reward. And it is like a bar that gives you pellets. It is running through a maze in a reality that is constructed by somebody else. And if you work for a big corporation, you are also living in a reality that is constructed by somebody else. And when you get out of that reality, all right, and you see the real reality that is outside of your city, of your business, of your social group, all right, it's mind-changing. It changes your perspective, all right? You realize, you know, you see what real good and real evil is. You see the people who are building up the society and doing good work, and you see the people who are tearing things down. You see how it really, really works. You don't just see what gets you a reward and what doesn't get you a reward. And that's why every man needs to get out of the society that he's raised in and just see the outside world for a little bit. Then you come back in, all right, and you can become a productive member of society, but you know what you're dealing with. You don't take it for being real. There's so many people who like their office politics or their social life politics. The politics of that group are their life. That's reality to them. It's not the opinion of their friends. It's their world. And it is their world. They've never seen the outside world. They have lived in the box their entire life. So don't be that guy.
Yeah, I think that's why you see the animosity that a lot of the times the blue collar have over the white collar people is because of that very thing, right? They see the white collar as existing in that Skinner box in the cities and things, and the blue collar guys and women are kind of outside of that, and they're kind of like, man, these people think they're running stuff and they're the ones hitting the food pellets and things, when out here we're doing, the real work. And I mean, in a lot of ways they're just as ignorant, but the thing is, you need to see both perspectives, and you need to be existing outside of those in order to truly appreciate what's going on inside of them. And I think that's really important in order to get a real opinion of what's really going around. So anyway, good point. What else we got for comments here? Ken, +1 for knowing about tubers. Of course, man. Survival training. You gotta know what tubers are.
Eat your tubers.
Eat your tubers. 100,000 years ago, old gorge. I don't know what that is. What did Derek say is the list of how men provide value?
So this is one thing. Here's one thing that you learn when you go out and you experience the world as it really is. And this is one thing you learn when you go and you write a passage. Whining is something that only children and people who live in Skinner boxes do. All right. Whining does not get you anything out in the real world. All right. If you're there's no animal that is going to jump down your throat or present itself to you to be killed if you whine hard enough, right? Whining only works when there are people out there who like you enough that they would rather give you something to stop your whining than just murder you and leave you to bleed to death. And so that's like the number one thing that you learn. And that's why Stoicism and masculinity and the rite of passage are all related, because Stoicism is also the idea that, in fact, that whining is the cause of your suffering. It is you holding on to your suffering and trying to use your suffering to achieve benefit over other people and achieve benefit from other people. And again, only somebody who, the more you live in that Skinner box, the more that's going to seem like a reasonable way to deal with your problems. And the more you live in reality, the more you're going to realize that is ultimately completely futile.
Ken had a question here. He said, sometimes guys get caught up in a competition of masculinity, more prevalent in the USA. What are some strategies for respectfully acknowledging another guy without getting into dick measuring? So I guess it really depends on the context of how this comes up, but for me anyway, I always try to comment on the reality of what's happening as opposed to the dick measuring act that may be happening. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm talking to a girl that maybe I don't know, but is actually, let's say, seeing the guy that's there, and he perceives that as infringing on his respects, whatever. So maybe he says something like, "Oh, maybe he gets a bit aggressive." He's like, "Dude, man, stop fucking talking to my girl." So there's to a lot of guys, there's only two really routes they can go there. They can fuck off, or they can stand up to him. But that's not really the only two options, even though that might seem like it. So for me, in those situations, I mean, there's a lot of situations where I will just walk away if the guy's getting too aggressive and he's drunk or whatever. But if he's still reasonably coherent and capable of discourse, if he says like, "Dude, stop fucking talking to my girl," I'm not going to see that as a aggressive threat on me. I'm going to see it as him trying, let's say, to respect or protect his own girlfriend, as well as sort of keep his own respect in that situation, which is admirable. I don't have any problem with that. That doesn't really negatively affect me. So, unless I'm an asshole and trying to steal her away, which I wouldn't do if I knew that she was with the dude. So anyway, so what I'll do in that situation is I'll probably just say something like, "No, man, look, dude, totally cool. If that's your girlfriend, no problem." It might be something like that, where I just sort of acknowledge what he's actually saying. I'm not going to say that, "Hey, I'm not actually trying to say your girlfriend. I just didn't know." And, cool. If you're saying that that's what's happening here, that's what's happening. It was just some dude being a dick for no reason. Some guy just wants to, start a fight or something. There's several ways out of there as well. If a guy comes up and he's just being aggressive, I'll just kind of look at him and be like, "You all right, man? Come here. Let's have a drink. And maybe just have a drink with him. And let him know that, like, "Look, I'm on your team." Or we're on the same team, more than likely. Not me on his team, but we're on the same team. And just letting them know that you're not going to be that that guy, let's say, that he might see you as in terms of the guy that's going to maybe try to puff his own chest out. I mean, when you look at animals and stuff, and I remember I used to do this when I was teaching body language. I looked at all these videos of animals before they had fights, and humans are animals. Like, we do the exact same shit that monkeys and even like tigers and lions and bears and all these animals do, which is every time that we're getting aggressive, we do these acts of aggressiveness. We puff our chest out, we do false starts, we show our teeth in profile. These are what animals do, not necessarily men, but some men do it too. And these are really all they are, is sort of these acts of aggression to try to get the other person to stand down. And if the other person sort of reciprocates those actions, there's usually a fight with humans and with animals as well. So a lot of guys see that as, oh, he's puffing his chest, I gotta beat my chest and puff it louder. And that may work in certain situations, maybe if you're a lot bigger than the guy or you got 10 friends behind you. But in most cases, what that really is an acceptance to get physical and not in the good way, to come to arms. So instead, what I usually do is in animals, the one that usually wins isn't the one that necessarily reciprocates that aggressive action. It's the one that ignores it and doesn't act like he even gives a shit, and acts very calm. And those are the ones that are, and if you've ever been in a situation with guys, you'll notice this, if you've ever, let's say you're drunk or you're getting aggressive with a guy and you're like, yeah man, you want to fucking go outside? And the guy's kind of like, yeah, let's go outside. You're kind of like, oh, fuck, what did I just get myself into here? This guy, I mean, he knows some sort of Bruce Lee martial art, or he's got a gun or a knife or something. Because why is he so calm right now? And those are the scary guys, right? So I'm not saying you got to do that, because there are some crazy motherfuckers out there that will just like stab you and shit. But there needs to be.
Those are the guys who underreact too.
Yeah, those are the guys that underreact.
And that's the word I use for it. It's underreaction.
Yeah.
It's when, like, if you're if you feel like a powerful person inside, you will naturally underreact to threats. You're not gonna not react.
Yeah.
You're not gonna ignore it. You're not gonna shirk away or something like that, because that often shows weakness to like a bully. But if you go, sorry, what was the problem?
Yeah,
Or,
it's.
What did he say? Sorry, I didn't understand that.
Yeah. I was gonna say you acknowledge.
That intimidates bullies.
Yeah, you could have, the way that you gotta do it is you understand what they're doing. It's kind of like
I see what you're doing. It's not gonna work.
Yeah.
Do you want to continue?
Yeah.
I see what you're doing. It's not gonna work, but go ahead.
Someone has like a pit of fucking spikes that they've dug and in front of you, and they're like, "Come on, man, come step in the pit. Come step in the pit right here." And you're wearing metal shoes, so you don't even give a shit. But you're not going to walk in the pit. You're going to be like, I see you just put a pit there. You want me to walk over in that pit? And the guy's going to be like, oh, fuck. Anyway, this analogy is terrible. But the point is that...
Indiana Jones style!
Yeah, the point is that you communicate that you're aware of what they're doing and you're above it. But if it comes down to it, you're totally okay with playing that game too.
Okay, we got some more questions. We got one. Mike asks, what rite of passages should high schoolers go through? And I mean, I think we kind of went over this a little bit. Sorry it took us so long to get to your question, Mike. I mean, I think, yeah, if you imagine you're in high school, so you don't have money. I mean, I had my experience after high school, and if anything, I would probably say save up your money or something and go traveling between high school and university.
I know some things you can do. You can only take small steps in high school because you're right. You can't take off in high school. Here's what you do. Really what it comes down to is dealing with your own fear, right? Putting yourself in a position where you have to sort of rely on yourself. And so what I would say is do things in high school that require you to do that. I did them. Join student council. Yeah. Join drama. Join improv. Join a sport, if you're more physically able. Do something where you don't know what you're doing, but you're being forced to have to deal with it. And that's building up that sort of muscle, I guess, if you want to call it that, in your self-consciousness. Like your ability to sort of be put in a position where you don't know what you're doing, but you can still come out of it okay. And you want to train that from a very early age. So in high school, you can't leave, you can't go necessarily. I mean, you can go camping and stuff on the weekends, which I do recommend doing. Take some survival training, maybe with your dad, or save up and try to take some. And then on the weekends, try going camping with yourself. Bring a cell phone and let your parents know where you're going in case something happens. But try to put yourself in situations where you don't know what to do, but you have to think your way out of it. And it's best if there's situations in which there is a somewhat of a risk, whether it's a social risk of embarrassment, let's say, with student council and with you might lose and have to do a speech in front of people and have that, or with drama, or an actual physical risk where it's camping or doing a sport or something. So yeah, I would say if you're in high school, those are probably the best things you can do until you can do something a bit more immersive when you have more time.
All right, so we got another question here, and it is Patel, who is saying, sometimes we set all these goals for ourselves, like our health, friendships, relationships, career, etc. How seriously should we be taking goals like this in order to achieve them, but not feel overwhelmed by them in the present?
So this is something we talk about. We have a program called Charisma Decoded, which goes into this in detail, because this is a pretty popular and common problem that a lot of guys have. The short answer, if you haven't seen Charisma Decoded, is that you got to break it up into actionable steps and focus more on them than the big, large goals ahead of you. Because when you focus on those big goals, you're not going to get anywhere, because you have to focus on actionable steps. So you got to break it all down. Take that big goal, bring it down to daily actionable steps, and then focus on those. And that's the short answer to deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole deal is, your goals must always be outside of your grasp. Otherwise, they're not goals. Yeah. Otherwise, they're not very meaningful. So you do want to set these, set big goals for yourself. Set really big, impossible goals for yourself. And be satisfied with progress, right? And this is the thing, life is, I don't know how old you are, but life is long. You can achieve so much in 5 years.
Yeah.
And so if you set these huge goals for yourself, and you work towards them every day, in 5 years you will be so far beyond where you thought you could be. Even if we just use the analogy of walking. I mean, if you just started walking and you did it for 1 hour a day, where would you be? Where could you be in the world? The answer is you'd probably be almost anywhere in the entire world if you just walked 1 hour a day.
Yeah.
But the same is true with any kind of skill or any kind of career. You can go so far in 5 years.
This is the problem with people, by the way. Just to use Chris's same analogy as walking. If we were a culture that all lived in wheelchairs that didn't know how to walk, we see some guy come by just sprinting. We're like, holy shit, that's amazing. I want to learn how to do that. And you stand up and you twist your ankle and fall down. You're going to be like, fuck that. I'm not doing that anymore, right? And the problem is, I think as a culture, our inability to deal with failure. And the truth is that consistency and having sort of a belief that you're going to achieve something is so powerful that you can, that's essentially what we teach. Getting better at girls isn't about all of a sudden coming to coming and talking to us, and then all of a sudden you come out the other end of being this expert with women. It's not really the way it works. You have to spend a lot of time, you have to deal with a lot of failure in order to get there. We give you a path and we can teach you some things that save time, but really comes down to you and your ability to deal with failure, a constant failure that's going to happen. And there's no way around that. Anyone that tells you otherwise is lying. And that's true for almost all skills in life, that are worth learning, I would say. And that's something that I think a lot of kids nowadays, and not to be the old man shaking his hand at youngins and stuff, but I think there's an inability more than ever they want instant gratification, they want instant results. And that's the way that the, economically and how we advertise and marketing wise, that they sell things now. So it's hard to tell someone, you can get this, but it's going to take you 3 years of doing it every day. People will be like, fuck that shit, I'm not even going to touch this then. That's way too much work. The thing is that's where happiness comes from. Yeah.
It gives your life meaning to have some kind of goal that you move towards. And this is the problem with instant gratification, is that when you want instant gratification, your horizon is so narrow in your life, and it's impossible to it can be impossible to be happy unless you have these giant goals that you set for yourself, these impossible goals, right? And so you have to let go of that narcissism. You have to be able to accept goals that you might not be able to achieve, because if you don't do that, you just fall into this kind of aimless funk where you're spending your energy in a dozen different directions. And so to get back to the guy who says, sometimes we set all these goals for relationships, for health, friendship, relationships, career, etc., and they all get overwhelming. Let me tell you something. What you want to have, here's one way to deal with it, to look at it, is these are not separate goals. These are not separate goals that are in conflict with one another. All right? You have one goal. Your goal is a vision of yourself in the future who is living this life that you want to live. All right? That has all of these things in it. But you are going to, as long as you're moving towards that life, right? You're achieving progress in your life, and you don't need to feel overwhelmed because you're hopeful, because you have a direction that you feel yourself going. You feel progress towards it every single day, and so it's always motivating. It's always rewarding. It's when you see these things as having no relation to one another or being in conflict with one another, as people often do, that you get paralyzed by this like sense of dread or existential angst or what have you. It comes from not seeing how all these things tie together and how they're all related. And once you see how they all relate, by visualizing yourself in the future and seeing where that end goal is, then all of a sudden it becomes much easier to pursue all of these goals at once, because all of your energy is going in the same direction, right? It's not, when you see working out as conflicting with having that social life, you're torn. You don't want to work out. You don't want to do your social life. You might just decide, I'm going to stay at home and play video games because I can't do both of these things. Why do either? Why get in shape if I'm going to be lonely? Why have friends if they're going to laugh at me for being a weakling or something like that, right? It might go through your head. But when you picture that life, when you picture the end product, all of a sudden it makes a lot more sense, and you realize, you can do both of these things. They're not in conflict with one another, and I think that, to a large degree, is the solution.
Yeah, I remember Chris telling me years ago, where he was working out regularly, and being in shape is something I've always struggled with, mostly because I have good genes that I never really needed to be in good shape, at least to exercise and stuff. I remember asking me, like, oh man, how do you hit the gym every day? Like, I just hate it. I go there and it's just like such hard work. And he said something I hadn't heard before at the time, which was, you need to fall in love with doing it. You need to enjoy the act of doing it. And until you can convince yourself that you enjoy doing it, you're never going to be able to really, to do it every day. And if you constantly see it as a struggle, it'll never work, and you'll always give up.
I have crap willpower.
Yeah.
I'm really bad at it. And the majority of things that I do are built around dealing with the fact that my willpower is actually not very good. Let's see. Do we have any questions? Do we got any people who are asking, who want to appear on voice here to ask some questions?
What, we got any comments?
Ken has a ab lounger for sale. Didn't work to get him a six-pack.
No.
All right.
Ab lounger GM works very good.
Okay, let's talk about the cultural stuff then. Let's get into this stuff because let's. I think you were going to say, can you be a common man in a feminist society?
That's right. So my question was, yeah. So I wanted to talk about
trigger warning.
Trigger warning.
We're going to disagree with you if you believe in trigger warnings.
Can modern feminism and a classical idea of masculinity coexist in today's culture?
I think it depends on what you believe by modern
feminism.
But if you believe like the Jezebel magazine, like since 2010, no.
Well, this is the problem. Nowadays there's a spectrum of feminism, and on one end it's complete horseshit, and on the other end it just sounds like rational, equality. And how, again, equality is another word. You can define it in many different ways. But so that's. But I guess with the only definition of feminism that'll work in this, to answer this question, can it be possible? No. Why not?
Because you cannot be happy as a man when you loathe yourself, and you ascribe to a value system.
Hold on, though.
That leads to self-hatred.
There are some facets of feminism that I think would agree with a classical idea of masculinity. I've been told. And I've met some feminists that I've agreed with for the most part. So I think there is subsets of it.
If we're talking about the modern stuff, the current stuff, it explicitly rejects gender essentialism, which is the idea that men maybe like playing sports and playing with cars for any reason other than we are just brainwashed by society to do these things. That's a core tenet of...
Is that a core tenet?
Yes. Yes.
Is it?
I mean, here's the thing. You have feminists who think that other feminists are sexist and reprehensible. So, insofar as the word feminism describes a group of people
it seems like
that actually have opinions these days, then no, it rejects gender.
It seems like there's this doctrine of feminism that certain aspects of people that call themselves feminists tend to focus on in terms of what their agenda would be, I guess, in progressing. And I guess some of them, because I've talked to some of them, that their ideas of feminism would something be as simple as, let's say, just common stuff that I would have no, I think most guys would have no problem.
If you just mean believing in the legal and political equality of men and women, then there's nothing. There's nothing that. There's no conflict between legal and political equality and believing anything you want about what the genders actually are in real life. The only problem is, if feminism was really about the legal and political equality of men and women, that's a very easy, succinct description of feminism. And all those other books on feminism would be completely redundant because we'd be able to sum up the entire ideology in just 2 sentences.
Yeah.
And so feminism, if it is a real thing, is actually not about that.
But
because otherwise you wouldn't need to explain it or anything like that. And this is the thing. So part of the thing is, I could say, well, what is Christianity? Well, Christianity is just do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's all Christianity is. So if you believe that, you're a Christian, right? That's what I believe. Well, of course, that's not what Christianity is, right? There's a whole book.
Of course.
You have to believe most of it in order to be a Christian. And if you say, we just follow the 10 Commandments and we believe do unto, well, we don't even follow the 10 Commandments. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not what Christianity is. It's not an accurate description. And that's what, when feminism says, feminism is just the equality of men and women. It's like, no. There's a whole book there full of other doctrines that you have to believe in today's society.
Interesting. I mean, I had a feminist one time that told me that, look, you believe in the idea that evolution in a lot of ways dictates how we are in terms of men and women, obviously, and the way that we act, and we shouldn't deny those things because they're sort of they make us who we are in terms of as men and as women, right? And then their argument was that, but if I'm a woman and I wanted to have the experience of a man, or at least some experience of a man, I don't want to have that, all these things you attribute to evolution stopping me from living the life that I want to live. Is that fair?
Yeah. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But if given absolute freedom, men choose to spend more time on their cars and women choose to spend more time doing other things.
But
that's not. There's nothing wrong with that, and you shouldn't expect otherwise.
Right. I guess her issue is not that we're going to do our own thing, they're going to do their own thing. Is that, but there's a society that pushes against that.
Right, and that's the conspiracy theory that you have to believe in to be a feminist these days.
Okay.
That is wrong and completely unproven and actually very harmful. Right? Society makes me do these things. No, society doesn't like. If society is making you do things, stop listening and do something else.
Yeah.
That's it. Nobody is being, very few people are being actually, let's say, coerced with the threat of violence to take a certain career choice or something like that. And the fact that you have to, everybody has to live in society. We have to take into consideration other people's existence in the way that we choose to live our own lives. That's not unfair, right? That's the reality. And again, it's people who are in a Skinner box and they don't know how to leave the Skinner box, right? And they're complaining about the existence of the Skinner box, but they can't step outside it to change anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective.
You don't have to live in the Skinner box.
Yeah.
Unless you want your food pellets delivered to you with the press of a bar, in which case you do have to live in the Skinner box, and you have to live by other people's rules.
Yeah, it's too bad too, because any women that might be watching this, feminists, might be thinking, probably are thinking, oh, it's easy for them to say that because they're guys and they live on the other side.
Oh yeah, nothing bad ever happens to us.
Yeah, It's funny. I actually was talking to my wife today, and she said that she was trying to call the cell phone company that we have because she wants to cancel her account or switch to a new phone or whatever. And she said that when she called the guy to cancel the account, because I was one that started it, even though I gave her full permission to do anything, and it's on the account, the guy talked down to her and was basically telling her, oh, no, you can't do anything with your husband. Your husband set up the account. Even though it says you have access here, I can't do it. And it wasn't really according to the way it's done, and I know that. But he was only doing it because she was a woman, and he thought maybe she was some disgruntled wife or something trying to cancel the cell phone plan on her husband or something. And it's easy to look at that, and I think if I was a feminist, I'd be like, see? There it is. There's the evidence right there. But if it was the other way around, and I was calling and my wife had set up the account, and it was a woman that I was talking to, and she thought I was some sort of disgruntled husband trying to cancel my wife's cell phone plan, it'd probably be the same experience. So I don't even know if it's a societal issue as much as it is just a gender oppositional issue.
There's a confirmation bias problem going on where there's an assumption there.
Yeah.
You're assuming the motivations of the person who did it.
Yeah.
And it might very well be that there's just a rule.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think that getting dicked around by cell phone company customer service is a gendered phenomenon.
That's the number one problem right now in gender equality.
Anyway, all right. Let's talk about how do you develop great energy in conversation. I heard it's a good buffer to bad game.
That's
a little off topic from the masculinity thing, but let's just the political stuff.
How do you develop great energy in conversation? I heard it's a good buffer for that game. Yeah, I think having great energy comes down to having a great, what we call vibe or energy, and that really comes down to being in a good headspace when you're out. And what you'll find is that when you're actually in a good headspace, conversation flows a lot more easily, a lot more freely. And it also makes situations in which you normally think are deal killers for women, for instance, running out of things to say, or maybe even saying something that would be very disagreeable, smooths all those right over. And this is why, we've always said the guys that get really good at this and the guys that are really good with women are guys that are able to control their own emotions, control their own state, as we say. And that's the big thing. Because if you can control your own state, I've seen guys have the most boring conversations with women, like logically boring in terms of if I saw a script of what was said, I'd be like, that's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
But their energy was on, and therefore everything was fine. I've seen guys that were spitting hot fire with their game in terms of if I read it, like, man, this is some of the best game I've ever seen. But their energy was terrible, and therefore the situation was terrible. So it really is the defining factor. So to answer your question, how do you do that? How do you get good energy? There's a number of different ways. Number one, use your friends. Go out with your friends. Have what we call sort of banner stories, where you guys have games you play when you go out. Me and Chris used to do this all the time. I mean, we still do it when we go out if we're just in a shit disturbing kind of mood, where you have bullshit stories of how you know each other or why you're out that you just tell people, and they're just funny for you and your friends. Sometimes it's like, oh, we work in fish stick production. We make fish sticks. Sometimes it's
the Bishwick brothers.
The Bishwick brothers.
Bishwick's fish sticks.
Bishwick's bitchin' fish sticks. We do. We're dairy challenge champions. We are professional milk chuggers. We can chug 4 liters of milk without puking. Just dumb stories that have a lot of detail to them. So if they ask, we can go into much great detail about who our competitors were, who we beat, what the games we play, and all these sorts of things that are involved with that made up story. But it's really only there to have fun with ourselves and get a kick out of it. And women will recognize that. They kind of see it. They're kind of like, oh, I can kind of tell they're bullshitting, but they're having a good time. This is kind of interesting. I'm kind of getting sucked into their world. But if you're out, let's say your friends aren't next to you, getting outside of your head, stop being inside your head, start noticing things going on in the bar. I used to have this state reset thing that I do where I'd be like, you know what, I'm 33 now, so if I was doing it now, I'd say, I'm 33 years old, I'm in reasonably good health, these are the days that when I'm 80 years old, if I should be able to live that long, I'm going to look back and be like, these are the best days of my life. And I should enjoy being in this moment. So I smell the air, I listen to the music a little bit more, clearly. I sort of just smile, look at all the fun everyone else is having around me, and I'm kind of like, man, this is awesome. I'm alive and I'm young right now. This is great. And just sort of put myself in a positive mood, and then just talk to the first person I see. Hey, you look cool. I just wanted to say hi to you. What's your name? And it's all kind of like, I don't want anything from them. I'm just sort of like this beacon of positivity, this sort of like looking for other people that are as positive as I am. And if they're not, that's okay. So if I talk to them, they're kind of like, I don't know. And they're weirded out. And we're like, don't be shy. Come here. And I'm going to try to coerce them into being as positive and as outgoing as I am. And
I think that's a powerful one, though, a powerful attitude. Not being needy, not wanting anything from anybody. And again, to bring it back to like the rite of passage and going out and living in reality, it's when you go out and you learn how to take care of yourself and how to be self-sufficient, all of a sudden you realize you don't need anything from anybody.
No.
Even though you benefit from other people immensely, but you don't need it. And so it changes your perspective when you go back into your society, and you're coming now. You want approval from people. You want people to like you. You want good partnerships. You want good friendships. You want a good relationship. But you don't need it. You don't need to press that lever to get your food. You don't need that lever. You know how to get your own food somewhere out there, and it changes your relationship to that kind of thing, and it helps you act in a less needy way around people.
Yeah.
Okay. So somebody was going to ask, what are the three core things that every man should focus on? What would it be if you had to pick three things that every man should focus on?
Oh, geez, I need some more time to think about that. That's a hard one. Three things that a guy should focus on. I guess it's in terms of like.
That's a good question.
Yeah, in terms of if you're looking to be a man that is the master of his domain and can go out into the world and achieve the things he wants to achieve, I would say the three things. So this is hard without getting a little bit too, I don't know what the word is even, introspective or something. But I would say having an appreciation for who you are and I guess your place in the world and how it works. That's like many things. But I just like having a humbleness, a down-to-earthness about what you can and can't change, and acceptance of that. Again, this is almost esoteric sounding at this point, but that, and I wouldn't even know how you go about learning those things outside of just raw experience in life. You're having faith. So I guess the definition of confidence, being able to rely on yourself. So having faith in your ability to get through situations. So that would be just working on your confidence, which everything we've described in this episode would be ways that you could do that. The rite of passage stuff, the going and traveling alone, all that sort of stuff. I think that's something that's absolutely required. I think you need to master something in your life. One thing you should learn to master. You should focus on it until you can say that, at least with your own definition, that you mastered it. Doesn't mean you're going to need to be the best in the world at it, but something that you sort of like conquered and you know a great deal about it. Things that, like hobbies necessarily, like video games and masturbation techniques and things don't really count. I'm talking things that require a specific skill set that is admirable and respectable, I guess would be the way to put it. So, and instruments, a language.
Yeah, that's a good. I tell guys you should try to have an athletic interest, a creative interest, and an ambition.
Yeah.
So if you're going to focus on three different things, it should be physical fitness or athleticism in some kind of way, some kind of creative outlet, writing or music or even maybe just an appreciation of those things, and then some kind of financial thing. So something that's gonna leave your mark on the world and provide enough value to the world that you can pay yourself and have and still have something left to contribute to society. That would probably be the third thing. I'd say focus on those three things, and you're going to have a well-rounded personality. You're going to be a well-rounded person, and anybody who ignores any one of those things is going to wind up regretting it. You can't, like, they're not even optional. You can't live a full life without engaging in some kind of physical activity. You're gonna die young, right? And you're not gonna live having known what it even feels like to be athletic about anything. It's not hard. If you don't have any kind of creative passions, you're never gonna use your mind to its fullest capacity. You're not gonna experience that the pleasure of being creative, and if you don't work on some kind of financial ambition, something that has some kind of payoff career wise, you're going to never flourish as you won't be able to pay your bills. You're always going to be financially insecure. You're never going to enjoy the security of being a productive man who knows that he can expect his labor is going to be worth something. Mm-hmm. So those would be the three things I think. Like if you're going to focus on stuff, make sure you have all those three things covered, and then there's all kinds of stuff after that.
If you're really lucky, you can find a profession that includes two or maybe even all three of those. If you're like, what would it be? Like a dancer for Cirque du Soleil or something, I guess it would be covering all three. It's very rare.
An
jobs.
exotic dancer.
An exotic dancer would cover all three, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. Highly paid exotic dancer.
Yeah.
And then you can just devote yourself entirely to that.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. We've got the solution, guys.
Yes! All right, we should wrap up the show now. We're getting towards an hour and a half.
Thank you guys so much for coming out. Please give us a like. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Subscribe, and you can turn on the notifications in YouTube so that you're going to get notified next time we go live at Monday at 8 p.m. And once again, please share this around if you found it at all useful. And tune in next week. We are going to be talking about. We're going to be talking with one of the guys from Project Rockstar. Is going to be coming out next Monday. And he's going to be describing Project Rockstar, what it's all about, and he's going to be talking a little bit about the natural, a little bit more into the natural masculinity.
It goes Simplified Natural, which is their sort of, the way that they teach guys about this stuff. Very, very interesting. We've known him for a long, long time. His name's Andrew. And Project Rockstar, if you don't know, is literally, if you could imagine your wildest dreams in terms of what you could accomplish with this sort of stuff, that's essentially what they do every year. They travel around the world with a select group of guys. You got to audition to be into it, to get accepted into it. And they take a select group of guys. They go to Victoria's Secret lingerie parties. They go to like Yacht Week in Croatia and in Europe. They go to like Fashion Week in New York, and they basically globetrot for I think 6 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And go to the coolest parties in the world. They pick up supermodels. They live on boats. They live a life of luxury, and it's. All the while learning all these
I tell people about Project Rockstar and they just don't believe it.
Yeah, they don't believe it. Yeah.
They're just like,
that doesn't
exist. But literally, like what this program is they go and they spend all day engaged in self-development. They spend all day working on their public speaking skills and their game and their inner psychology and stuff like that. And then they go out to the best parties every single night, and it's a crowd of like really awesome dudes. Mm-hmm. And it's probably is actually like being a rock star, except rock stars have to work usually when they're on tour. So this is, these guys actually have to work. They're doing a lot of self-development during the day, but it's a really, really incredible program. So that's going to be next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Tune in right back here, and it's going to be me and Derek and Andrew talking about Natural Game, the Simplified Natural Method, and Project Rockstar. So come join us. All right, guys.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Next week.
Tune in next week. And now we pretend to. Oh, it's still recording.
See, you can't say we're pretending to talk while it
We got to pretend to talk while it fades away, like they do on the Tonight Show.